Welcome to section 5, Scanning DynamoDB. In this section, we are going to do quite diverse things. First, we are going to learn a little bit about AWS permissions that we spoke about in the previous section, and I told you that I will explain you a little bit more about that. Then we are going to learn how to scan DynamoDB tables, meaning that you will be able to find things in the table, not only by ID, but by other parameters. And then we will learn how to style our Slack response messages that we are sending back. As you saw, when we are getting a task, you just get a JSON and it looks pretty ugly. So we can style that up. Let's start this section by talking what are IAM permissions. In this video, I will introduce you to IAM permissions. I present you briefly the permissions in the previous section when I created the DynamoDB table with Serverless framework. We granted the permissions to AWS Lambda to perform some operations on the Dynamo table, if you don't remember. In this video, I'm going to talk about the basic IAM concepts, and we will be learning what we did in the previous part. We will be learning how to define permissions with Serverless framework, and I will go over all the bits that we did. The first question you might ask is why we need permissions. If we want to manipulate any AWS resource from an AWS Lambda, for example, from another resource, we need to give permissions to that Lambda, in this case, over that resource. Like in our case, we gave permissions to our Lambda to perform operations over the DynamoDB task table that we created. Because when any new resource is created in AWS, like Lambda we created, by default it doesn't have any permissions over any other AWS resources. Therefore, it's important to understand the permissions creations and granting to be able to use AWS in a secure way and to create systems where different resources can communicate with each other. So, IAM permissions means Identity Access Management permissions. These are specific AWS permissions to access AWS resources. There are some basic concepts when working with these IAM permissions. We have users. So users are the end users and they have access to some resources. So if you remember when we created the student 1, we granted him non-permissions, but we put him in a group and the group had the administrative permissions. Groups are collections of users. When users are created, you can assign permissions, but it's a good practice that users are created with no permissions, as we did with student 1, and then assigned to a group, and the group is the one that has the permissions. Another important concept in IAM is roles. Roles are assigned to AWS resources. One AWS service can talk to another AWS service. For example, our Lambda task can perform some operations on the table tasks. Policies are documents that define one or more permissions to users, groups, and roles. So this is a JSON of a policy from a resource like Lambda to perform some operations on a Dynamo table called books. And this policy will allow this Lambda, for example, to describe the table, meaning to know all the different columns and properties of the table. Will allow to query, to find things in the table, and to scan. Those are two properties that we will see in the next video, that is to find stuff in the table. But for example, when it finds one particular item, it might not be able to retrieve all the data from that item. This policy doesn't allow this Lambda to put new information in the data or to modify it anyway. So it cannot delete or update anything in this table. So the policies can be very fine-grained. So we can go now to the AWS Console and I can show you a couple of policies for you to know what I'm talking about and you know where to find them. So let's go to the AWS Console and let's go to the IAM service AWS. You already went inside there when we were creating the users and the roles and all that in the video that we create the AWS account. We can go to users. We can see that student 1 has two policies. One that is the ability of himself to change the password, and the other one that is attached from the group that is the administrator access. So that's the one that the admin group is providing. If we check the JSON, you will see that it allows everything on everything. That's a very permissive policy. It's quite a dangerous one. We can go to the roles, and we can see the roles that were created for our lambdas. So we can type there, because the screen doesn't show everything, learning serverless, and then tasks, that is the name of our project, task manager dev, that's the lambda role that was created. And there we can see that there is one policy, and it has this kind of create log stream, put logs event, things like that. That's created automatically by Serverless framework when the lambda is created. But then also we can see that there is the Dynamo policy that we created in the previous video. So you can see that it has access to read and write on this table. So we saw the policy in the AWS Console for the Dynamo table that we created for the Lambda. And here is what we wrote in our Serverless framework in the last video. Is the IAM role statements, that is the place where all the policies will be defined in Serverless framework. Then we will have an effect that is allow or deny. In general, as the permissions are always 0, then it's quite a normal practice to allow, because everything will be denied by default, so usually you allow things. And then all the different actions that this lambda will be able to perform on this table. It can scan, it can get an item, it can put an item, it can update an item, and it can delete an item. And then over which resource. You can have one or multiple resources. And you can have as many of these policies as you want in the IAM role statement. For more information, you can check the link that is in the screen that will explain you how to define these policies in Serverless framework.